That's one of my favorite chapters. The one
Thank
that
you.
with the quote. And it just
Oh,
feels so funny because you have a quote of like Ramanath and like I don't know who else, Krishmati or like Ganjiji, and then there's like my name
Yeah.
Frank, and I was like, it's like a cosmic joke. I was
How
telling
cool
people
is
in my
that?
group that, and then they started laughing because oh, this is so masters, and then it was like, well, what's my name doing there? That's why
Yeah.
we take that and then we weave it into modernity so that spirituality or Dharma becomes completely invisible and 24/7 your life becomes an invisible monastery. How do you become the totality of yourself? Like we all have our, like I said, karmic tendencies or
Mm-hmm.
we all have our incarnational talents, for example. How do we manifest that completely? How do we turn and own our karma and turn that to Dharma, flip that to Dharma? All of it. All right. There we
Do you
go.
have do you have water,
I got water in
snacks,
hand.
a jar of
Let's see.
coffee, as we're gonna be
Uh,
sitting here for the next 5 hours, you know?
oh yeah,
Like,
probably. It will feel either like eternity or like nothing has passed, no time has passed.
okay, so checking my microphone, 111, 222.
I'm almost done with your book, like the last, like, but it's what
Oh
I
my
love. It's
God.
so wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, because I gave it to my partner and then she kept it for a while. She was reading it and then she said it really helped her on her ayahuasca retreat. And then she gave it to her other friend and her other friend read it and gave it to a bunch of other people and I never got it back until like a week ago.
Well, I love the idea that the book travels from person to person, like the one,
Me too.
the same. I love that. And I
Me
also love
too.
the fact that you, even though I sent it to you, then give it to your girlfriend. And I loved receiving the email from you saying that you found out from your girlfriend that I quoted you in the book because you didn't
Yeah.
even get to that point.
I didn't get to that
And
point. It
that's
was so funny. That's one of my favorite chapters. The one
thank
that
you.
with the quote. And it just
Oh,
feels so funny because you have a quote of like Ramanath and like I don't know who else, Krishmati or like Ganjiji, and then there's like my name
Yeah.
Frank, and I was like, it's like a cosmic joke. I was
How
telling
cool
people in
is
my
that?
group that, and then they started laughing because oh, this is so masters, and then it was like, well, what's my name doing there?
But around that time when I was writing about the ISNESS chapter,
Right.
I came across I thought of for some reason I thought about reading your blog,
Uh-huh.
and that's where I read about your take on 10 fetters, which remains to be one of my favorite takes
Oh,
on 10 fetters because
right,
it's
right.
just
You
so
told me about the
it's just
Panthers.
so succinct and it's
Yeah.
just like I love it. And then I saw you say this, and I remember, first of all, I remember thinking, and I told you that last time, it was like, how the hell did he manage to like capture this in few sentences? And I was like struggling with to capture
Mm.
it in a whole chapter. To me, it was just like, and then I just remembered the joy, just the joy of putting your that quote from your blog in the book.
Mm.
I remember it was just, and just to also, put someone that's contemporary. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the
that's what
the
the thing I wanted to
regular
talk to you about.
guy who is out there. You
Contemporary.
can
Yeah.
listen. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I just yeah. So I remember really loving that and kind of giggling as I was doing this. So I was like, how cool that actually
Mm.
people exist these days, regular people who experience those shifts and stuff. And
Mm.
why not quote you? Why not quote them
Mm.
as well? You know what I mean?
You writing that in the future is like after you read my blog and writing it is actually co-arising and existing simultaneously with when I wrote it and when I was inspired to write that by whoever that I listened to, maybe like
Mm,
that blog, Simply the Scene. That was pretty
mm-hmm.
inspiring as well. You know that blog, Simply the Scene?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's how I realized like progress, like your progress on the path has everything to do with this karmic rippling. It's like, oh,
yeah,
it's not just like cause and effect, right? A cause is here and effect is there, and the cause comes first and effect comes later. It's more like the cause and effect arise simultaneously, and there's absolutely zero distance between cause and effects. The cause
yeah.
is an effect, and the effect is in the cause. So that's how I look
Yeah.
at this, the entire mandala of all sentient beings co-arising together to, wake up to itself. But it is in a sense already awake. But this
Yeah.
entire journey of spirituality, not just your journey, which is just a microcosm, but the entirety of the species and how everything is
Hmm.
just a fractal upon fractals. The parts contains the whole, and the whole contains the part, and it's so beautiful.
Right?
It's not neither the one nor the many kind of thing. It's not like we're all one. It is we're all one, but at the same time, we are also the one and the many, and beyond one and the many.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
each have our each individual journey, but then there's a collective, and they're not separate, but they're not exactly the same either. Ah,
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking actually, there's a question. So I have to rewind a little bit now because when we chatted last time and then you said, okay, I'm happy to come back. And I thought, why not ask people if they have any questions or they have any things that they might want us to maybe talk about or and
of
so I
course.
just so basically I asked because I just love engaging with people and I love hearing what they're up to or where they're at in this journey and so there were so many different questions, Frank. I mean, and I was just sitting sort of trying to like, okay, can I do like can I group them sort of as
Mm,
themes? Um, so I'm thinking since we started talking about the ISNES and everything you've just shared, there's actually one question that immediately came to mind. How
Oh,
do
I
you
do
feel
want to
about
say
that?
one thing. That
Yeah.
feels great. We can just base this entire
Mm-hmm.
conversation on the questions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, I also want to kind of ask you about your journey. Maybe that could be another talk. But then, like the way you lay down your journey, like I was like, wow, I can relate to this. I can relate to this. But the way you word it, it's there are a lot of similarities, but there's also differences in terminology. And then I thought it would be cool to like go over some of the shifts you had, and then coming from my journey and the context that I was coming from. Um, that could be something that we can weave into the conversation. But another thing that I really want to just get it out of the way is this thing called BDSM. Yeah, people hear BDSM, they're like, "What
Mm-hmm.
BDSM, the sexual thing?" But what we are talking about, especially in our boot camp, BDSM means Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and M means modernity. We could also mean marriage. It could also mean machine or money or
Uh-huh.
mating or like minstrel. Like we're trying to cultivate not just awakening but a complete human being. You're like, how do you reach completion in terms of like your particular incarnation, your beingness, your becoming, rather than just
Mm-hmm.
recognizing presence, how that presence illuminates to highlight or to fulfill your particular incarnation as a human being. Like a maestro is kind of like a renaissance man. That's where we originally got the idea from. It's like, oh, training a maestro, someone that isn't just about one thing, and I thought that that's yeah, I don't know why I wanted to put it out there, because I think a lot of this conversation is going to be around how spirituality aligns with modernity. Like you said, you wanted to put my quote in there because it's contemporary. Yeah, because I do
Oh, do
think
you
a lot of
mean
the
just
mismatch
do you mean
between,
just with the like regular life, just
yeah, just yeah,
life and
especially with
living and
modernity. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
but you don't have a problem with like integrating modernity because you didn't really have like a historical background in terms of spirituality, which I found really interesting. And that's another thing
Yes.
that I also wanted to talk about, because I think people reading a book, they're gonna be like, oh, what am I gonna do? And then there's also a different camps of different people with different spiritual backgrounds. They're like, oh, I'm cut from this practice, that practice. I'm into Theravada, but a lot of those teachings is like so out of context with modernity, especially we go into like a bottleneck of like with AI, and
Mm-hmm.
some people might even say like alien disclosures or whatever the case may be. We're in a really
Yeah,
special, interesting time, and some might even call it
definitely.
like the death of Dharma in a sense, because like taking the context of like spiritual teachings that we think we're familiarized with and put it in a modern context, that creates a lot of discrepancy.
Yeah.
So I do
I
think that
can
that's
tell
one
you,
topic that I want to weave into. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, definitely. I mean, we can go all sorts of places and
yeah.
my thinking is like people kind of send me those questions and I thought I thought of prioritizing the questions from people in first. I don't know if you're okay with
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, yeah, totally.
It's like I don't even know how we're gonna. covered the whole thing.
Oh, interesting.
Because
Okay, let's go with that. Yeah, we could
there were
maybe
quite a few.
I do still want to invite you to my podcast if I haven't started inviting people yet, but then maybe when we can talk about your journey and how that aligns with like the whole trajectory of spirituality
Yeah,
historically
I
and
would
maybe my
love
journey
that.
and another.
Yeah,
Yeah, because after
I
I read
would
your
love
book, I was
that.
just like really want to ask you now. Yeah,
Yeah. No, thank you. I am very happy to share some things because it was the only thing I want to mention that for me at the beginning as someone who doesn't come from a tradition, and I really genuinely
exactly.
didn't have
Yeah,
any knowledge. I had and not
yeah,
only not coming from any particular tradition, but really just not even having knowledge about that there is such thing as stages of awakening or
yeah,
progress or none of that. And frankly speaking, by the way, I'm kind of I'm kind of grateful that it played out that way, because I've
yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen
Of course.
so
Yeah,
many traps,
yeah,
that can come from knowing a lot about these
yeah.
things.
Totally. I think that's one of
Um,
the biggest trap in most people's journeys.
yeah, yeah, and that is not to
Yeah,
say I really don't want to suggest that like I still see the knowledge about anything incredibly useful, incredibly illuminating, but I cannot help but see just how it can also become a trap,
yeah,
at
yeah.
at
Totally.
every stage in different ways, and it gets like
Yeah.
more and more nuance. And I have to tell you
Mm.
that like it's because I didn't have knowledge or even terminology. I was like I knew this book just wanted to be written. That's the only way I can describe
Yeah.
it. I didn't have any investment in writing.
That's what
Like
makes it
do you know what I
unique.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
literally, Frank, I was writing the book without knowing why the hell I was writing it or even who for. I had absolutely
Mm.
no idea, which doesn't make it easy, by the way, in terms of like structure and like things like that. But I remember at the start, one of the things was like, I'm totally unqualified to talk about it in the sense that, like, I don't have the language. I don't really understand the terminology as much as, so many people that I listen to, including yourself. So I
Mm.
felt like, oh my God, how can I write? But then I thought, all I've got is my direct experience. So I am just going to speak as simply as I can in the way I know. And the feedback that I get that really warms my heart, when people email me
It's
is
really honest and
precisely,
authentic. Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
yeah,
I
this
love
is
it.
like all of
Mm.
the sudden the lack of terminology and knowledge kind of became the whole kind, not the whole point, but what a lot of people
Yep.
appreciate because they can relate. And many people sort of say, the awakening, you made awakening not look exclusive, you made awakening look
Yeah.
accessible because of the
Yeah.
language. So that's the only thing I wanted to say for now about that. But I'm more than
Mm.
happy to have the of all the people, like I'm just like really really happy to have the conversation with you, like the sort of back and forth about that at some point. I would love that. Um and thanks again, by the
Yeah.
way, for taking the
Yeah.
time
I
to
think
read it anyway.
what I had in mind. Yeah. I'm gonna finish reading it just like the last
Yeah,
few I think
yeah,
pages, but what I have in mind is like I guess you could say you are karmically ripe to awaken. All the cosmic conditioning came together, and you not finding about spirituality is part of that cosmic conditioning. But that's I think quite rare. Yeah, quite rare. Yeah,
yeah,
uh, right. I don't know.
yeah.
I think it's equally pros and cons. People read too much about it, or people don't read anything about it.
Yes,
Those are like the two sides
yes,
of the extreme. That's why
yeah,
your book is so refreshing because most of the books out there are from people who, except for maybe Eckhart Tolle, that's maybe why he's so popular. Yeah.
yeah.
I was just gonna say, it's just like the one issue that I see with that is that um, people probably just wouldn't because not everyone can be karmically ripe in order to just
Mm-hmm.
like examine their feelings and then boom and it just shift after shift. Like
Yeah,
some
yeah,
people probably some need to some kind of a structure or system. And where do we find that middle way? And then
yeah,
not
totally.
that Buddha Dharma Sangha is anything that is to be verified, right? They need to be self-invalidated as well, right? That's why
Yeah,
we take that and then we weave it into modernity so that spirituality or dharma becomes completely invisible and 24/7 your life becomes an invisible monastery and then there will be the end of dharma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Totally.
dharma means
Totally.
phenomenon, and all phenomenons are empty of inherent existence, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Well, I can't wait to have the conversation, but I'm gonna bring the
okay,
first
okay.
question.
Is some
I'm
questions?
gonna I'm
Oh, the
gonna bring
questions.
the first question that I because I feel like it's kind of related, still connected to the stuff we're talking about. Because someone asked me that both I and you talk about that there is anatta, and then there is, and for many people, anatta is the quote unquote arrival point, and
Mm,
that many people don't realize that there's the after. What is the difference then between anatta and that thing that comes after? And can you and Frank talk about that a little bit? So I think that
oh,
this is
great
kind
first
of
question. That's
related.
great first question. Yeah, no, this is totally related, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's completely related. And yeah, yeah. Well, I
go.
do think that from reading your book, the isness is what I would consider an emptiness realization, empty self-emptiness realization. So it is anatta. And
Hmm.
and he is correct in saying, and I have also been saying that anatta realization seems to be the end of the spiritual path for most people in terms of their direct contact with the materials out there, or like when people speak about awakening, and that seems to be like the quote unquote final stage. But there is more after that, and then we can talk about what more means. I mean, the
Yeah,
realization is that realization, right? The
yeah.
realization is actually just recognizing what's always and already there. In fact, you realize that it's always been here. That doesn't mean that there's
Hmm.
no energetic shifts, perceptual shifts, even your belief system, even physically, you can change to align towards that realization, right? But
Hmm.
the emptiness realization is what it is. Yeah,
Hmm.
is what it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because is no is anatta again. This is where I don't really. I'm not 100% sure because I get really confused by the terminology because it seems to me that different people mean different things. Um, is
Yeah,
anatta
they do
realization the
actually.
no self realization?
I think another realization is seeing the lack of inherent existence in all phenomenons. So that's the simplest way I can describe it. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what you describe in the book are different facets or different degrees and different depths to unnaturalization. So actually, when I look at your book, the entire book is about realizing unnaturalization, but then there's different degrees to it. There's different depths to it, different levels of integration. How much can you instantiate this particular part of the realization to what? So it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it is very simple, but at the same time, like I said, being in presence, you can recognize presence, but how that presence illuminates beingness, there's a lot of different things that you can talk about. The totality of your being, the geometry, the shape shifting geometry of when being and presence dance together inseparably. And I listened to a video yesterday with Lisa Karn. She's like one of the OGs. I can't believe she's been making non-duality videos for like 20, 15 years. That's crazy. Do
Yeah.
you know Lisa Karin? Yeah, she
Yes.
was trying to
Yes.
make a video explaining non-duality in 2 minutes because she started to experiment with like shorter video formats with like Instagram Reels because a lot of her
Yeah.
videos are like very long. She can
Yeah.
explain it. But then this video is like, okay, how do I explain non-duality in 2 minutes? And she just went into being in presence immediately. Okay, you recognize this presence is all pervasive, boundless, luminous presence that is, I guess, just aware of itself, observing without the observer. But then there is also the beingness. The beingness cannot be negated. The beingness is, I guess, the way we put it is like how you aggregate, how you might aggregate through the five aggregates of form, feeling, perception, consciousness, and fabrication. We don't need to break that down. We just, what I'm saying is like there is this beingness here that is still here, and it's inseparable from presence, even after the realization. But realizing the inseparable dance between being and presence, and this totality of that shape shifting geometry is really, I guess you could say, the rest of the path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then how do you become the totality of yourself? Like we all have our, like I said, karmic tendencies, or
Mm-hmm.
um, we all have our incarnational talents, for example. How do we manifest that completely? How do we turn and own our karma and turn that to dharma, flip that to dharma, all of it? Well,
Hmm.
I guess all of it is a little bit like, oh, there must be an end. I don't think there is an end either, right? But then I guess you can, one way to put it is at the end of the journey is about instantiating the Dharma, instantiating the realization of emptiness to every aspect of your life. And how does one do that? Well, I guess that's a really big can of worm. But what I'm
Yeah.
trying to suggest here is that to me is the end of the rest of the path after realizing self-emptiness. So going back, let me clarify a little bit. Anatta realization, I you can say it's a no self realization, but then people just will verify no self and be like, oh, no self is it, right? No self is it, right? But then you want to see the lack of inherent existence again in both self and no self. Like you said that a lot in your book as well, right? Neither resistant nor not resistant. Yeah, kind of like the middle way approach where you are including but transcending, including all sides of the extreme, but transcending them.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So I think one approach is a yogic approach to, or maybe it's also a kind of inquiry to arrive at the anatta realization is called non-affirmative negation, which means that you negate something without affirming its opposites. So a lot of people get trapped or get stuck on a spiritual path. We're doing inquiry or doing meditation is that they will negate something, but then immediately the condition and the dualistic mind would reaffirm its opposite right away, immediately, without even recognizing that's the mind's tendency to do that. So let's say, okay, I listened to a bunch of teaching about how the self is an illusion. Okay, then I do a bunch of inquiry and I saw that, oh, there is no self, or that you do a lot of practices to try to negate the self. But then immediately they would reaffirm the opposite, such as now they make no self into the new self, or they make awareness into the new self, or they say, I am not fear. Oh, I'm not my mind, I'm not my body. Huh. Do you see that you are just by reaffirming the opposite, you are actually confirming what you started out off with in the first place, by from the opposite direction. So that's why a lot of people are sort of spinning in circles. So another
Hmm.
realization is not just one state or a thing. It's, I guess you can say, just recognizing the true nature of all phenomena as lacking inherent existence, and everything arises. The appearances do arise. They arise through the process of codependent origination. So dependent origination and emptiness realization also go hand in hand. That's why some people call it, after you realize anatta, all you see is relationships. Everything is in a process of relation, or that some people say emptiness and love, form and emptiness. What I just said earlier, the inseparable dance between being and presence.
Hmm.
So it's not just about no self, it's about the entirety of phenomena and seeing the lack of inherency in all phenomena, including the emptiness. Like I would say last time, really important to keep reminding people not to make emptiness into a thing. The moment you make emptiness or anatta into a thing, then that's not the realization anymore. So it's almost like
Yeah.
a continuous refinement of your view, of your viewless view, in a sense. That viewless view, that's not really a view, right? It's just in linguistically, we can say it's an ultimate liberating view, but that includes but transcends all views simultaneously.
Mm.
Yeah. So to put it
Yeah.
in one
This is
sentence, realizing the lack of inherent existence in all phenomena, and then people immediately be like, "Oh, no, nothing exists." Well, no, I don't. I didn't say nothing exists. I said lack of inherent existence,
exactly.
because when you say
Yeah.
nothing exists, you're making non-existence into a thing, and this is all about transcending existence and non-existence. Yeah. So you can get very, very subtle, but then you can also make it very, very simple, right? That's the beauty of
Yeah.
the realization. It's like there's infinite ways to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can, and this is why, I can completely appreciate the confusion, when you
Oh,
even if
yeah.
you
Yeah.
use the
That's
term
part of it.
emptiness, and different people already with emptiness alone, it's so different what
Yeah.
people
From
refer to as actually emptiness. I called it for me, I don't know if you remember, but like for me,
I
emptiness, the
do.
word emptiness was not used at all for
Yep. But
anatta, right?
what you call
Because
isness, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So what I
yeah.
call isness, because for me, emptiness was almost, or rather, empty fullness, more like it was when basically the sense of separation dissolved, and
Hmm.
the formless was formed. There was no separation. There was no, in the simplest terms, it was like. I was not separate from God, or the
Yep,
unity consciousness or whatever. But the point is that there was still, first of all, a sense of an I
yep,
that kind of landed in that empty fullness. So in other
Yeah.
words, the unity consciousness or the empty fullness were still it was a landing place of sorts, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like this is like this is the, I'm using just my language because that's the only way I know. And then the emptiness was very different from nothingness, right?
Hmm.
Which literally is such a struggle. It was a entirely different experience. And actually, I want to say something. You did a video um, where I think I've already started on the book at that point when I saw it. Yeah, definitely. And you actually outlined, you were like emptiness, nothingness, um, and you call it something else after that. And I was like, oh my God, I felt like you used the same terms, like it was the same
Hmm.
sequence. And I remember you saying that it was like shift after shift after shift. It was like within a certain short period of time. And I could so
Hmm.
relate to that. So now the nothingness was different from what I call an emptiness because it was important because there was the sense of I and my life was gone,
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
thing basically after that. And then it was also connected to the no doer. So like the waking up and realizing, oh my God, stuff just happens without any sense of an I that
Hmm.
sort of is. So I would say that was the end of a sense of what I would call a personal volition, a sense of a personal volition, right? That doesn't mean no volition, by the way. And
Yeah, yeah, I love when
right.
you said that because you say that doesn't mean there's no will. You can that's what I've been saying. You
Yes,
can will without agency. You can think without
totally.
thoughts,
Yeah,
or you can
exactly.
desire without grasping. That's what I've been saying.
Yeah.
But can we
So
go back to your phase of what you call emptiness real quick?
sure, yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah. So I think what you've been describing is just different facets, and again, different depth of realizing the nature of mind. You realizing the nature of reality. So what you call emptiness, a lot of schools would call it unbounded consciousness, or maybe
Hmm.
I amness realization, or the realization of Atman.
Okay. Oh, thank
Brahman,
you.
even
Yeah.
Brahman. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Even
yeah.
Brown.
Yeah,
Wow.
this
Okay.
unbounded sense of consciousness. Yeah. But then it's a really sweet spot because people can really get stuck there because it's
Big
such an
time.
all pervasive kind of thing. Yeah. But then, like you say, even that doesn't go away, but you just, what happens is that you saw even that's empty of inherent existence. But again, that doesn't
Totally.
mean that you annihilate it. You just see that it's not a thing. It's not a thing you can cling on to. It's not a thing you can verify or latch your identity to. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And this is, and it's kind of funny because the only thing at that point that I knew was because both the emptiness slash empty fullness slash Brahman slash whatever, um,
Mhm.
you know, they had phenomenal nature to it. You know what I mean? There was
Mhm.
like,
Of course. Yeah.
right, there was an experience that I can describe. It was like this
Mhm.
and like that, right? Um, and I remember one thing the teachers, certain teachers that I listened to at that point already saying, do not get stuck on anything like that. Like
Mhm.
anything that
Yeah.
comes and goes, any
Yep.
blissful states, any
Yep.
mind-blowing, phenomenal nature
Yep.
states, not that,
Yeah.
not that. And I think my brain must have registered this so much that I was literally just moving on. I was literally going after this experience and making a cup of tea and moving on like nothing happened. It
Mhm.
was literally, I mean, there were certain things that stayed with me. In other words, those were permanent shifts, but I didn't go and dwell on them, if that makes sense. Like I didn't
Right.
go and made it to a thing, or anything like that. So, but I would say what came after the emptiness. So I don't know. Again, emptiness, nothingness, and then isness to me was this is
Okay, what's the
where
difference between emptiness and nothingness again? Sorry, from your
the
book.
nothingness was basically everything disappeared. Like it was just there's just
Okay.
nothing. And in that nothingness, which if I have to make up some more, I would describe as some kind of primordial void or something like that.
Oh,
There
okay,
were there
okay.
was
Okay, okay.
basically a bubble, and
Mm-hmm.
something saw that bubble as me and my life. This was me and my life, the
Mm-hmm.
bubble. And as soon as this was recognized, the bubble burst.
Yep.
And
Makes sense.
but there's just nothing, and in the
Mm,
morning on the next day I woke up without any sense and saying to my partner, there's nobody here, but like
mm-hmm.
there's just nobody here, and cleaning my place and doing all the chores without
Mm-hmm.
any sense of me doing the thing.
Yeah.
And it was quite disorienting, I have to tell you, because it really felt like viscerally like I was hollow, in a sense. It was like there
Mm.
was like a hollowness. Um, so, but the isness was an entirely there's just
I
really no
can
words to
to-
describe this for me, other
I
than
can
I
totally understand where you're coming from, man.
other than by talking about why it was different from the previous shift and why it was beyond self or no self, beyond
Yeah.
nothingness or emptiness,
Yep.
and yet it totally includes it all. And I think
Includes
the
it all. Yeah.
huge, the huge part, and you mentioned it, so was like there was a seeing of the whole structure of self, which I also refer to as mechanism of resistance, and that collapsed,
Hmm.
you
That's
know?
actually what the self is. It's just a bunch of mechanisms of
Right.
a resistance, just as
Yes,
different strings of
exactly.
resistance as bundled up together, and then we call it that self.
Yes,
But then that's all there is.
right.
It's just resistance. Yeah.
That's it. And so when that happened, sort of, right, there was basically no sense of I left that experiences anything. It all felt like there was just an experiencing. It didn't even feel like an experience, but more like a verb, It wasn't like a
Hmm.
experience, as in like
Hmm. Yep.
so
Yep.
and it
Yep.
was also the death of paradox. It was the death of
Oh yeah, the
paradox.
one
There
before
was
that.
like no, which is what, and there was above all, there was no sense of I, and therefore without that sense of I, there was no place to land anymore.
Hmm.
There's no place to land and say, this is how it is, or you know, all is empty, or all is
Hmm.
this, or all is that.
Yeah.
There's just yeah, this is the closest the way I can describe it. There's just no place to land, and there's no eye that looks for a place to land. So it's
Yeah.
both connected, if that makes sense. So,
Anatta really again, it's seeing like the middle way. That's
right.
another way to describe it. The middle way
Oh, I
transcends
like
but
that.
includes.
I
Like you
love
can say,
middle way.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
includes both the self and the no self, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that your experience of emptiness, what you put in your book as emptiness, and what I guess I can describe that as the I amness realization or recognizing presence. I think
Mm-hmm.
Rupert Spiral talks about recognizing the God mind, the awareness, and there's a tendency to project a self onto that and call that the big self, even at the subconscious level. So, like you said, there's still a reference point, either between
Totally.
you, there's still the rest of the center that hasn't been dissolved, that's pointing to that and say, oh, that's God. So by doing that reference point, either you
Mm-hmm.
are again affirming some kind of identity, or you're creating a separation between you and God, you and awareness. And then seeing how even that dense a reference point, again, it could be there, but then you see how it's just relational, right? It's just relation, just like subject object. You don't need to get rid of subject object. You have to see
Yeah.
fundamentally that the subject and object co-arise together. So they annihilate each other while at the same time affirming each other, right? So,
Yes.
but we can go to that later. But then once you were in that state, and then you sort of see through to the lack of inherency in even this empty fullness,
Mm-hmm.
as you call it,
Mm-hmm.
and now
Mm-hmm.
you are in the state of what you call nothingness. And I find that very interesting because I think the entire path is a process and cycles upon cycles of contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion. You go through an expanded state, and then you contract after you either saw through the lack of inherency in that state, and then now you kind of abiding its opposite. And then for a while you unfold, and then the dialectical process continues. So it's like Hegelian. It's like you have a thesis and an antithesis, and together you merge the thesis and the antithesis. You go beyond both, and then there's a new synthesis. And now that new synthesis become the new thesis. So there's cycles and cycles of these like phenomena, compounding, decompounding, decompounding,
Mm-hmm.
decompounding. But the deeper that your insights are, the more you can see that they're just part of, I guess you can call the same cycle, the same unfoldment. So you neither grasp onto expansion, bliss, mystical states, neither do you trying to annihilate or thinking that contractions are just bad, something to get rid of, because then you run into the trouble of, on one side, annihilism or just annihilation or nihilism, which can lead to nihilism. I just want to dissolve every speck of the conditioning, every speck of the self. On the other side, you
Mm.
just want to infinitely expand. Like people take psychedelics, they just want infinitely expand, infinitely expand. So that's eternalism versus nihilism. So these dualities, sometimes people don't see that they are part of the same cycle. And just like when I speak about cause and effect, how they are kind of embedded within each other, and they give rise to each other codependently, then you, once you start to see the insight, you cling onto neither, and you grasp onto neither. Neither do you dissociate
Yes,
from either, and then you go
exactly.
beyond it,
Yeah.
and then you start another cycle. So that's pretty much the path. So it's all about seeing the opposites and then going beyond. So the reason why I think you said it was impossible to describe what you call the isness is because it, see, some people describe that as a non-conceptuality, but then
Yes,
you
I
can
can
describe it
see
like that, but
that. Yeah,
yeah,
and this
yeah, yeah,
can be misleading because
yeah, exactly.
I can.
I'm gonna go there. Yeah, yeah. It's not
Sorry,
about no
go ahead.
concept.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead. Go
it's
ahead.
not
Yeah,
about
yeah,
no concept. Yeah, yeah. Because
yeah.
non-conceptually is not the opposite of conceptuality. It's categorically distinct from it. Yet it includes, not apart from, both concept and no concept, both thoughts and no thoughts. I think the challenge for most people is that they would hear something like non-conceptuality, but then they are still making the reference of what non-conceptuality is
Yes,
from its opposite. So if you do that, you're still creating that duality. You can never go outside of it. And where some people try to go outside of it and they create another bubble, the ultimate bubble, the unconditioned bubble that is non-conceptual, and they think all thoughts are bad, and they try to annihilate thoughts, or their teaching becomes, oh, we have to sadden the mind. But you can have no thoughts or thoughts and still be in quote unquote non-conceptuality, right?
totally.
So that's where most people, again, last time we were talking about wrong views, right? So basically, if you don't have the right view, the view of the viewless view, the middle way view that transcends or includes, the dualistic mind will make something into a thing, and then either they continue the process and then seeing through that, annihilating it, and making the opposite a thing again, and just go on like that,
Yes.
swimming from
Yeah.
opposite end to opposite end, until their insight is that, oh wait, those two opposites, they codependent arise. And because they codependent arise, neither has inherent existence. Neither is the source of the other.
Yeah.
Even the distinction between like source and awareness collapse.
Yeah.
The distinction between
The
self and also,
distinction,
you
it's
can
like it's almost
penetrate
like
all of it.
the yeah, it's not just the end of this is why it was kind of went further. That it's not only just the end of separation, it's the end of distinction, which is why the like a fundamental distinction between any of it, like the illusory and real,
Right,
so,
right, right.
so
Perfect. Yeah, perfect way to say it. Yeah.
right, like in that sense, and to me that was just incredible, which is why it was a death of paradox, because all of a sudden everything
Right.
coexists perfectly without conflict, and it's
Without conflict at
and
all.
without conflict, and what I'm seeing a lot is like when literally something can be made of nothing, nothing can be made to a thing, and then that thing has to look a certain way, and this is what I call like the landing place, or
Hmm.
um but also there's two things that, oh, I don't know if I'm diverting here now, but um, as I listen to you, I see sort of two things. I see that my first insight was into the nature of thought. My very first insight, which I refer to as my call, first awakening, first shift. I didn't even call it a shift. I call it a
Wait.
shift.
Before you go down that route, can we come
Yeah.
back in just 1 second? I just want to clarify the aspect of non-separation. Yeah, because like
Yes.
just as because people I think would immediately think like non-separation means oneness. See, I just want to tease out the really subtle ways in which the mind cling on to ideas.
Beautiful. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Non-separation, non-separation. Okay, so I guess you can say oneness, or this sense of like merging with something. I have to do
Mm-hmm.
meditation to merge with something. The sense of oneness
Mm-hmm.
is the appearance of a non-separation from the perspective of separation, actually. So true unity, let's just call it unity. Unity includes both separation and non-separation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you see how tricky the mind is when people say, oh,
Yes.
non-separation, it must mean oneness. But presence is neither one nor the many. But being
Yeah.
is both the one and the many. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you for saying that because
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
but this is precisely an example of, do you see how the terminology floats around and then
Yeah.
the
Yep. Yep. Yep.
like
That's exactly the problem
that
with most people's path.
that's the problem, because different people will mean completely different thing, and I've noticed that you can literally share, I've noticed that you can listen to someone and we will be using the same words, but when you actually start digging, and the
We mean
farther
something
down,
very
you're like,
different.
oh my God, we're talking
Mhm.
about completely, entirely
Yeah.
different things. But
Yeah.
the reason I'm just jumping to the first realization for a reason, because how again, so it's so easy to treat anything as an arrival point for the eye,
Yeah.
because like for example, my first shift, literally within a split second, I saw my entire life across the board without any thought, with no narratives, no labels, nothing. And there was just what is. There was just what
Mm.
is. That without any label, without any thought about it, things simply are, right? So this is how I would have described it. And so this was, I call it now my first glimpse of isness, but it has nothing to do with the isness that I
Mm.
talked about in the
It's
last
categorically
dish.
distinct, but it's not apart from it. It's not
It's
apart
not
from
a
it. Yeah. Yeah.
part, but
Isness
it's
includes
almost
not
like,
apart. Exactly.
right, right. And so even with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
isness, I sometimes hear people talk about isness using this word because it's obviously not my word, it's not original, but it's just that's what came through when I first tried to tell you
Yeah.
there's just what is, there's just this,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
It's just
okay,
this. Yeah,
isness,
yeah, exactly.
right?
This is like exactly. Yeah, people would
Yeah.
infer that isness to their, I guess, dualistic mind and say this is already isness, but they're still coming from dualism. They're
Yes.
making isness into a thing from the perspective of their direct experience, which again is not a part. That's why it's so hard to like
Yeah.
argue about these kind of things because it's not that their isness is completely different from like the
What
isness
we're
of the
talking about
realization.
here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not
Exactly.
apart from it, but at the same time,
Yes.
it goes beyond even the whole separation between sameness and difference. So it's really hard to describe because once you get to that point of like what I call non-separation or non-conceptuality, well, what you call isness, there's really no words to describe it at all.
There's
Yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
words.
But
And in fact,
yeah,
Frank, I
yeah.
would say that this is a great clue for people. I would
Hmm.
now, if I were going through it now, and I would say, treat this as a clue. This is why I put a quote. If you can explain it, it was not about isness, it was about God. Someone
Hmm.
said, if you can describe
Or
it,
it's
it's
about the
not
isness
God,
based on their
right?
experience in the dualistic sense. What isness is? Oh, there's just this, but it's still they're still separated. Right, right.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a good clue for people to, like, if you can describe it, it's not it.
Yeah.
If this is a thing that you, and also if you even think you
Or
arrive,
an
there's an I
experience.
that arrives, or the I, if there's any I left that thinks it arrived or attained anything, right? Then that's also a hint that there's,
Mm.
still a sort of way to go, which is why I love how you all often talk about this constant
Yeah.
invalidating,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah. You
self-invalidating
invalidate. Yeah, you invalidate without affirming something else.
without
That's really the
affirming
key
something
because
else.
people are really good in validating, but then the dualistic mind, or if you the mind is still afflicted, you can easily turn the process of uh, negation or the process of self-invalidation and make that into a thing. Now everything has to be annihilated. Everything has to be constantly, self-invalidated, which is part of the
Hmm.
process, right? But then really, well, we're talking about embodying life ultimately, right? So what is the point of self-invalidating everything? The point is so that you can substantialize things without clinging, without being identifying to form, to appearances, to the self. You can have a self, you can construct a self. Now you have the flexibility to aggregate in ways that most align with this particular moment. So the whole point of annihilation is not annihilation itself, is that so
Yeah.
that you can live a full life, so that you can substantiate with skill, with wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then to
And
do that, you really
also,
have to completely penetrate through that duality between even like emptiness and form. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally. And the other thing that comes, especially like recently, came through to me. It's almost like how every shift, like I said, can become a sort of a landing place. And it's almost like you've seen through that, okay, I'm not just this body, you've seen maybe into no
Mm.
self, and stuff like that. And now it's like you're basically just swapping one identity for a new identity
Yeah,
of
yeah,
a
yeah. Yeah,
transcendent
that's another thing.
of a
Yeah,
transcendental type. So,
yeah.
I am awareness, I am presence, I am or it's all just you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
It's
I am
like
emptiness. I am a no self. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
because I think it's really important to like the sense of I will always looks for a sense of safety. And if it
yeah.
doesn't find safety in the so-called
You'll create
material
one.
world and material things, then it will find that safety in the transcendent, in the true self,
Yeah,
in the awareness, in the whatever, and so it immediately it can literally wrap itself around even no self and make that to be a new
exactly.
identity, you know?
Yep, yep,
So to
yep.
me this is so fascinating, and it's nobody's fault. It's just
It's nobody's
it's
fault. It's just how
it's just
this is
what's
just the
happening.
nature of samsara. It's just the nature of phenomenons, right? The nature of
Yeah.
phenomenon is that they compound and decompound. So if we don't see the nature of phenomena as being again like impermanent or empty and inherent existence, you either verify the compounding or the decompounding. So if you feel
Yeah.
contracted when phenomena compound, you're gonna want to decompound, and then you're gonna want to hang on to that, or you take psychedelics to decompound. But the nature of phenomena is that that's just how the nature of phenomena is. It
Mm-hmm.
compounds and decompound, shall I say, simultaneously, going beyond even like, oh, compound now, decompound later, because like I was said in the beginning, time isn't linear. Well, timeless includes all three times. So you don't want to be trapped in the timeless either. So I'm just saying, like, phenomena compound, decompound in this
Yeah.
constantly shape-shifting geometrical spheroid that that's just how reality is. This constant like shapeshifter, right? Right.
And it's like you said, like even things like, just because at some point, in other words, there's no grasping, there's no rejecting,
Right.
it's
Right. There's
sort of,
no
but
aggressive,
but
no
it's
rejected.
but it's happening very naturally, and it's also like, for example, there was the name seeing that like everything said about awakening is a fabrication. That was so like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
True.
But immediately one might say, "Oh, it's a fabrication. Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about
Let's
this
not do anything.
bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all
Exactly.
bullshit."
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. It's like you're not
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm
rejecting
saying.
something in order to affirm something else, which in this case would
Yeah.
be, let's not talk about the stages. Of course, I've
Yep.
seen that there was like ultimately no process and no one attaining anything, and this whole thing just really looked nonsensical. But that was no reason to reject the fact that it appears as though there are the stages and
Yeah.
shifts, and there's
Yeah.
one who whatever attains something, right? Yeah. So
Yep. Yep.
we
Yeah.
keep
So
on
that's a
going
really
back to the
interesting
same
point that you
thing.
brought up
Yeah.
because appearance do have consequences. We still live in, you can say this world is just made up of hologram, but if your head bumps into the wall, it's still going to hurt, right? You can still hurt your partners. And if you are going to like bypass that, which a lot of people do, then one can say that your path is not completed yet because you haven't, what I said earlier, integrated your insight into every aspect of your reality. So
Yeah.
there's still more work to do in that way. Yeah. And then
Yep.
how does phenomenons compound? Now you realize that all phenomenons are empty. That's great. But how do they compound? How do we construct our becoming? How do we construct our being? Because the presence is presence. But then again, beingness, there's a lot to work with in terms of like beingness, how you are. Like not just recognize what you are as quote unquote the indescribable, that's like inherent existence, but the appearance, how appearance plays out, the trajectory, your karmic trajectory. Where does this
Hmm.
like infinite four-dimensional sphere? I say four-dimensional sphere because it's like the three dimensions of space and the one dimension of time, and together that's what we are. We're not just a little body. We're actually this like shape-shifting sphere. Where does the sphere? How does it roll? Which direction does it roll? There's a trajectory to it? It's rolling, but at the same time, it's not going anywhere. So all of us are just like interpenetrating, but we each have our own little spheroid, which is not apart
Yes.
from the whole. Right? It's the fractal, like it's the whole thing about you're inside the universe. The universe is inside me, and neither whatever. But then your life, basically the totality of your life, that there is a certain ontological or visceral perceptual geometry to it, right? That's when the aggregates come together and create this, what we call you, this you,
Yes.
right? And we
Yeah.
are our own version of God that is not apart from other gods and it's not apart from, the reality, but then it does have a trajectory. You do have your life to live out. And how do we do that?
Absolutely.
How to
Yeah.
instantiate our dharma so that it's inseparable from our karma, from our individual incarnations, human beings, human incarnations. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I guess
Yeah.
you could say. This sounds very abstract, but that is in a way to describe the rest of the path. But most spiritual
Yes.
teachings just stop there. They just give you the realization, and now what? Actually, the toughest part about realization is what the fuck do you do with this thing? It's almost like you're given like this infinite self-driving car, and then there's a lot of buttons to it maybe, and then you just kind of have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to do it. And then those buttons of the realization is no different from the buttons of life, the buttons of modernity in our context.
Just probably one of the reasons why I have trouble understanding, when someone says, how do I, and I understand the question, someone is, how do I reconcile um, my insights or my awakening, um, with the sort of day to day, with relationships, with the
Exactly.
day to
Yeah.
day, with the
Yeah.
job, with the whatever. And
Yeah.
I have to tell you that from where I'm at even though I do understand the question, I really don't understand the idea of reconciliation of this point. You see what I mean? Because
Mm.
for me, there has to be, it's almost like for reconciling to happen, there have to be two separate things.
Yeah.
The I that reconciles something, like as though the life is something separate from the isness that we're talking about, as though you, like, they're still seeing life or
Hmm.
form as separate from
Yeah. Yeah.
formless.
They're
So
still
then there's an,
they're
do
still
you see what
seeing
I
that. Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's, so
Yeah.
then of course there's a valid question that says, well, how do I reconcile the two?
Mm.
I can't answer that question because for me, this is a question that comes out of a sense of separation. So the sense of so I would look at that. I would explore that
Hmm.
first. Other than that, there's just yeah. I really, I think this is also where people sometimes describe like going in and out, aligned,
Mm.
misaligned,
Yeah.
or
There's no
not
such thing either,
aligned,
actually.
in
Yeah.
and out. There's no such thing either, right? So I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
can't, even things like self, true self, as though these are, we're still constantly talking about two things, as though
Hmm.
they were
Yeah.
separate. So so I think that
Mm.
I don't know about you, but I would explore and inquire into the sense of separation at this point, for as long as those two things, the life
Hmm.
and the awakening, or the life and the realization, look like two different things.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
I
What do
think in
you?
the beginning, it will look like two different things for sure. In the
Yes.
beginning,
Yeah.
even after the initial realization, it will look like two different things. But then further view refinement reveal that there's absolutely no distinction between like often on-cushion training, live training, or like, mind training. It's all inseparable. Or like I said, dharma and karma, it's all inseparable. Your realization is
Yeah.
life. And then there is a gradual process of recognizing that. But then even when you so again, like there's a degree in which you can see that insight, right? Just because you can see it when things are going well, it doesn't mean that you can see it when things get really intense. So that's another way to put that. The rest of the
Yeah.
practice may be to again instantiate that even when you recognize there's no separation between even spiritual life and mundane life, there can still be moments in your life where you feel like you need to iterate, you need to orient this way or that way. But then at that
Yes.
point, we don't even need to talk about spirituality anymore. At that point, it's
Exactly.
just literally how do you live your life in the most virtuous and skillful way possible. Yeah, but then
Yeah.
I would say for a lot of
Beautiful.
people's part, there is a process of like trying to bridge that gap between like the realization and life. But even when it's
Mm-hmm.
bridged, that doesn't mean we're perfect. You can still continuously iterate. Now I guess we
Totally.
can you can either say continuously iterate your realization or continuously iterate your life, continually
Mm-hmm.
iterate your relationship. You can describe it however you want because it's completely inseparable. Yeah, yeah. But then I will say that if you do have the realization, even if it's inseparable, there is a sort of an orientation that you can kind of align yourself towards, that aligns more with your particular incarnational disposition of like what you are fundamentally as a being. And that's slightly different for everyone. That's why people have different paths, different expressions of not just realization but creativity. We're different beings, right? We're non-separate, but again, we're not completely just one goo either, right? We all have our, from this field of inseparability, which includes the inseparable and separation. We have infinite ways to express, and then there are more skillful way to express yourself this way or that way. But then after
Totally.
realization, there's just no suffering doing that. There's a lot less resistance, but that doesn't mean that you don't continue to like develop, iterate, and even deepen your realization of emptiness. That's not apart from all of this. Now your deepening of your realization is inseparable, completely inseparable from, say, having a better relationship with my mom. There can be on a more expedient level, maybe different sides to look at it, right? It's like, okay, I can, let's say the goal is to have a better relationship with my partner, so I can either have seeing the emptiness even more clearly, or just do the human stuff, buy her more gifts. But even though they are inseparable, there are ways to look at this infinite jewel that might be more useful in this particular portion of the relationship versus that. You know, in one instance, it might be the best idea to even just to, I can see that it's all. I can see at a deeper level, it's all appearance. On the other hand, I can see that, I just need to like treat her like she is a beautiful woman that's completely substantialized, and then just give her a hug and give her gifts. And even those two ways of looking is completely inseparable as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
But it's just different
Yeah, totally.
tools. It just becomes a tool. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it just becomes a tool. Spirituality is just a tool. Yeah, it's just a tool
Yeah.
to train your mind to see its true nature, right? But then there's other tools. Yeah.
I mean, there's a few things that stand out for me because you brought up one important thing that I want to go back to as you spoke now, which is that even after the sense of even when the sense of separation ends and the life, the life no longer, the form and formless, let's put it this way, no longer
Mm,
look like two separate
okay,
things.
look. Yeah.
Then what may happen, I believe, is something entirely different, where even though there is no sense of separation, a particular shift, such as no self, such as nothingness or emptiness or whatever, they become a hiding place or a way to, it's almost like the mind hijacks the shift to
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah,
deal with
totally.
your shit. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that
basically
exactly. Yeah.
to like, oh, like, say, let's say childhood wounds or some kind of traumas or some kind of conditioning that clearly is still playing out, but you're like, well, who's there to, who experienced the trauma, or who's there to work on the trauma, or who's, who, right? Like, or it's all an illusion, or it's all an whatever, right? And so it's, again, it's not like there's no truth to, and like there's no truth to what I've just said, but it's just yet another example of how that can become hijacked by the mind, and turn it into
Hmm.
what I call a hiding place, basically, where you hide from life, where you hide from, where you fear being impacted by life, being triggered by life, by, life day to day stuff that goes on,
Life is stressful.
basically.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so I think that this is also a really great, and again, I say this with no judgment because I've been there and I've done that, it's like, it's just really worth, if seeing where there's this fear of what I call being affected, because if you have fear of being affected, by an argument, by a situation, by a person, by whatever, it's not even about being fearless, just just noticing that's there, and just seeing, like, well, why am I hiding for life? What am I afraid of if this person rejects me, or this person criticizes me or something? And just look at it with curiosity, which is, I'm saying, I'm not talking about be fearless, don't fear being
Hmm.
affected. You
Yeah.
can totally still fear being affected, but just get curious as to why you fear being affected,
Yeah, yeah. That's
yeah.
another way to describe what I was describing, like iterating. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because now you have this wisdom now that you can continuously illuminate the rest of your being that might not have been illuminated yet, and you don't know which part of your being has been illuminated until you just live life and interact with other beings. That's why the relational fitness thing is so important to me in terms of like post-realization development, because it's only through relating, because first of all, again, there's nothing but relationship, right? After you see that everything is empty, there's nothing but relationship. It's through relating with people that you can really begin to tease out the rest of your being that hasn't been completely illuminated. Yeah, yeah. And I do
Yeah.
agree with you that because I've spent some time doing that as well, almost like using realization as a shield to hide or make maneuvers in which you don't have to feel. And that's very, very common. Yeah, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
like now we're talking about the reconciliation between, like, I guess you could call it the ultimate and the relative. Even that distinction is expedient. The ultimate and distinction, the ultimate and the expedient. That distinction
Yes.
will also becomes uh, expedient as well. But then still, that doesn't mean even after realizing that, you can still have certain moments where you could bring more aspects of your being into illumination. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I would even say, because you've read it, so you know that honestly, Frank, for me, every shift was another like a colonic because it
A
was like, it
colonic.
was
What does that mean?
like a colonic in terms of, I call it like a quote unquote spiritual colonic because it was only illuminating shit. When I
Oh
say
yeah, yeah. It's not. Yeah, it's not adding
illuminating,
anything. It's not subtracting anything. Yeah,
no.
it's just
It
illuminating.
was
Yeah,
it was illuminating the humanness. It was illuminating the
yeah.
conditioning. It was illuminating my coping mechanisms, my manipulations, my what I basically very sophisticated just call my
Mm,
human bullshit, you know?
mm.
And so, you know, and it was painful, you know, it was painful to see when you know the moment when the what I call the unconscious becomes conscious, almost like there's like a
Yeah,
flipping that happens and everything is out in the open, you know, and it's like there's no possibility at this point to kind of not see it, you know what I mean? It's because it's just like
yeah,
in
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
face, your
Mhm.
own
Yeah,
bullshit, you know.
mm,
So
yeah.
I suppose that for me after realization what remains is all everything remains in a sense that like the conditioning
Yeah, there's
the
nothing
the
but
whatever
conditioning in a sense.
exactly
Yeah,
the in
yeah.
terms of the way we function, right, in terms of the things learned in whatever, right, and the biology, my hormones that are like doing my head in, you know, at the times, and you know
Right.
stuff like that, like all of this sort of remains. And I think it takes me to the other bunch of questions because they were very much about that. For example, one big question was after realization, how did realization changed our relationships? What's different in terms of our relationship, close one relationships before and after realization? If we could talk a little bit about that, I don't even know where to start, so I'm just gonna give it to you. So,
I'm just gonna take a break and go to the restroom real quick, and
pee,
then
me
I'll
too.
come. Yeah, I
Okay,
need to
yeah,
pee. You
all
want to pee?
right.
Okay, great. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, yeah, cool.